Hey folks, I'm John Lee and welcome back to my channel, and if you're new, welcome. Alright, so today we're going to talk about a TV show that was just never meant to be, and that show's called Joseon Exorcist, or in the Korean language, it's called Joseon Kumasa. Now this show got cancelled after only 2 episodes, and in Korea that's like saying that it got cancelled right after the pilot. And that's because here in Korea, TV shows are mostly aired twice a week. So if the pilot episode is aired on Monday, the second episode will be aired on Tuesday, and the third and fourth episodes will be aired on the following week. And so yeah, this show got cancelled after only 2 episodes. So why did the show get cancelled so quickly, and was a big deal? Well, let's get into it. Okay, quick disclaimer, I've not actually watched the show, I've only read about it. And because the show got cancelled and it also got pulled off the air, there's no real way to watch a show unless you decide to watch these 2 specific episodes online, which I'm sure would be mostly illegal now. And so I have no desire to do that. I've only read about it. And from what I've read, the show's kind of out there. I don't know what exactly to call this genre for this show. Maybe historical fantasy, and the reason why I call it historical fantasy is because the characters are actually based on real characters that existed in Korean history. They're based on Korean kings. In fact, they name drop actual Korean kings. But of course, the storyline and everything else that happens in it is pure fantasy. It's all made up stuff. Now, from what I understand, the show was supposed to be about the founding of the Joseon Empire, which is the last Korean kingdom, and it was about how the kings decide to adopt the aid of Western priests in order to fight these evil spirits that they have somehow summoned in order to fight the previous kingdom that they wanted to overthrow. It's a really out there show. Now, this show only aired for 2 episodes, but it pissed off a lot of South Korean viewers, and the major reason that a lot of people gave was that it completely distorted history. Now, you're probably wondering why people would be upset about that. This show is about a couple of medieval Korean kings who are adopting the aid of the Vatican in order to exorcise demonic spirits. So yes, this show is not going to be historically accurate at all. Why would people be upset about that? Well, let me give you this very brief example. Let's say, for example, that there's a TV show about how George Washington is trying to fight for independence for the United States of America, but instead of fighting against the British, he's fighting against an undead army of zombies. Now, this show sounds like fun, right? It would be complete escapism. But let's say, for example, that the zombies were not actually your regular British soldiers who died, but were African slaves who rose from the dead. Now, if you're feeling uncomfortable by that notion that I just mentioned, well, that's because there's some things in history that are still sensitive today. And it's not sensitive because it happened a long time ago or recently, it's sensitive because they are still topics that affect the political discussion that are being held today. And that's the same kind of reason as to why a lot of South Koreans were upset with Joseon Exorcist. And let me explain a little bit further as to what happened. Now, of course, it wasn't the evil spirits that people were upset about, it was about the portrayal of the kings. In one of the scenes, King Taejong was seen as this guy who was hallucinating about massacring the Korean people. And in another scene, his crown prince, who would later on become Taejong the Great, was seen as this guy who was really cavalier about his bloodline and who was seen drinking Chinese liquor and eating Chinese food in a bar that kind of looked like a Chinese sort of establishment. And this really got a lot of people upset. It was this infusion of Chinese props and Chinese design and Chinese food products that got a lot of people really angry about this portrayal of the kings. So why would people be upset about the inclusion of Chinese food like mooncakes in a TV show that is completely ridiculous like Joseon Exorcist? Well, we have to talk about what's going on in the culture war between Korea and China. Now, in the West, when we say the words culture war, we really start to imagine things like, oh, someone talking about someone being pro-choice and pro-life or pro-gun or anti-gun. Well, in Asia, culture war is a little different. In Asia, culture war is about actual distinct cultures claiming sovereignty over the other. And that's been what's going on between Korea and China in recent months. Now, unless you've been living under a rock the past few years, Korean culture has gotten quite big around the world. From BTS to Korean movies to everything else, Korean pop culture has started infusing almost every other country in the world. Now, this has really done a huge number to improve South Korea's soft power. However, this has also come at a cost, and the cost has been borne by China's image of itself. Now, China is a rising power. It is the second largest economy in the world, and a lot of people in China believe that it is time for China to take its quote-unquote rightful place in the world stage. But because of the rise of Korean culture in K-pop and K-dramas and K-movies, a lot of people in China feel threatened by this upstart in Korea. And so because of the popularity of Korean shows and Korean culture around the world, they believe that this kind of threatens the image of China being Asia's middle kingdom. And so because of this, there's been a lot of pushback against Korean pop culture from China. So much so that there are a lot of people in China who are saying that everything about Korea has been stolen from China, whether we're talking about traditional Korean dresses like hanbok, or traditional Korean food like kimchi, or even traditional folk songs like arirang, or even the Korean flag itself. Some people in China claiming that all of this have been originated from China, and this has gotten a lot of people in Korea very upset. And we have to talk about why Koreans are very upset about this. It's not just errant comments that are being spoken about by internet trolls here and there. They're actually being spoken about by media personalities, by people in the news media in China as well. And because of this, this has gotten a lot of people in Korea worried. And to know why, we need to talk a little bit about what's called the Guryo Controversy. Now, Guryo is an ancient Korean kingdom, and it kind of occupied the northern all the way up to the central parts of the Korean peninsula, as well as parts of Manchuria, and at its height parts of Inner Mongolia as well. Now, this kingdom later on, of course, collapsed, but for a long time, people in China did not consider Guryo as part of the Chinese culture until the 1990s. And that's because that was when a lot of people in China, as the Chinese government actually, started to view race and ethnicity a little bit more differently from how they viewed things in the past. And that's because there are a lot of ethnic minorities in China. And one of the things that the people did in the Chinese government was that they wanted to change policies so that their policies toward ethnic minorities in China could be based on historical evidence or facts. And so they would claim things like how Tibet or parts of Mongolia or Xinjiang were part of China, and so the current day policies that they pursued against these ethnic minorities were justifiable. And because they wanted to control as much of their ethnic minorities as possible, the Chinese government in the 1990s started to claim that Goguryeo was a Chinese kingdom. And this led to a lot of bitter feelings from between Korea and China. And because of this, this started to really grow. And over the years, starting from the 1990s all the way to the present day, the Korean people have not had a positive feeling about the Chinese government, and it's only gotten worse over time. In fact, about 75% of South Koreans today have a negative view of China, which is the highest level of unpopularity that China has in South Korea's history. And with all of these people in China claiming that Korean culture actually belongs to China, in fact, a lot of people in China refer to South Korea as a thief country now, it has gotten a lot of people in South Korea really rankled, and it has gotten a lot of anti-Chinese sentiment going up the roof these days. And so when people saw Joseon Exorcist and saw Korean kings eating Chinese food and bad-mouthing their own bloodline, it really drove people insane. And this kind of grew into a conflagration that is getting bigger and bigger and harder to control. And we also have to talk about WeTV. Now, this show got cancelled in Korea, and so it stopped airing, but until just recently, until Saturday, this show was still streaming in China on a streaming site called WeTV. And on WeTV, they had this one line that they used to describe Joseon Exorcist, and this is the line that they chose. They said, "This is a drama based on the historical facts of the founding of Democratic People's Republic of Korea, the DPRK." Now, for those of you who don't know what the DPRK is, the DPRK, the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, is the official name of North Korea. This show was created by a South Korean company, and when this show is being hosted on WeTV, a Chinese streaming service, they use the acronym for the North Korean government. And so again, this has caused a lot of South Korean people to get really upset. Now, this show has also been pulled from WeTV as well, but until Saturday evening, this show was still streaming, and that was the description that was actually used. Now, history is always a sensitive subject, and the reason why it is so sensitive is because history is ambiguous. And unfortunately, history is also used as a political prop. It's used as something that can be used to defend the most horrific things that a country can do, or it can sometimes be used to define the cultural identity of a country. And because of the role that history plays in the way people look at each other or ourselves, history can never be a neutral ground. Now, the thing about historical accuracy is that no TV show or movie is ever completely historically accurate. Now, just on this channel that I just made, there are two movies that come to mind, Shilmido and Ode to My Father. These two movies were also historically inaccurate. In the movie Ode to My Father, entire chapters of South Korean history are not mentioned at all. In movies like Shilmido, things are just changed outright so that the movie would be more entertaining than what it was in real life. Things change. Historical accuracy is never completely faithfully observed in any movie or TV show. But what's really important is not so much the historical accuracy of it, it's whether how accurate a TV show is and how that accuracy, or lack of accuracy, can reflect on current day politics. And in Korea today, fairly or unfairly, justifiably or not, there are a lot of people who are now suspicious of China's goals and intentions toward the Korean Peninsula. And the way things are going, I don't think that this anti-Chinese sentiment is going to go away anytime soon. I think it's here to stay. And as long as that anti-Chinese sentiment is here to stay, it's going to cause a lot of people, especially in the entertainment business, it's going to make them think on whether or not certain scenes should be shot. It's going to make them think whether or not some kind of TV show should ever be broached at all. The topic about Sejong, that was a really weird decision that the TV show made. Sejong is a beloved king in Korea. His title is Sejong the Great. Very few kings are ever given that title, and one of the reasons why he was given that title was that he helped to create the Korean alphabet system. It's what allowed the Korean language to exist separately. Now, before the Korean alphabet system was created by Sejong the Great, the Chinese characters were used in Korea. And at the time, there were no simplified Chinese. It was all classical Chinese. And so only the royal family, only the nobles, only the rich people who had the time and the luxury and the privilege were able to read and write. Everyone else in Korea at the time was practically illiterate. And so when this Korean alphabet system was invented by Sejong, it helped to distinguish Korea from China as a distinct cultural identity all on its own. And because of the contributions that Sejong made for the Korean culture, he is considered Sejong the Great and one of the greatest king in Korean history. And it is precisely because Sejong the Great is such a beloved king that when this king was portrayed as someone who drank Chinese liquor and food and who badmouthed his own lineage, it really touched a nerve among Koreans. It just rubbed us the wrong way. And that is why there is a petition in the Blue House website, the Blue House being the South Korean presidential palace, where more than 200,000 people asked for this show to get cancelled. Which is why over 30 advertisers decided to pull all of their ads from the show, and which is why it got cancelled after only 2 episodes. So yeah, that's how the show got cancelled and why the show just was never meant to be. Now, because the major reason that was given for the cancellation of the show was historical distortion, there are a lot of TV shows and producers in this country that are now wondering whether or not they should even go ahead with their projects, whether or not there should be series edits, whether or not history should just not be a topic that they even broach anymore. And there are going to be a lot of people who are going to wonder as to how much Chinese capital that they'd be willing to accept from now on. Because as much as people were upset about this show because of historical distortion, it's also because of how they viewed it as a Chinese incursion into Korean culture. And so there's got to be a lot of people who are going to be wondering as to how they're going to be able to go forward with the entertainment business in Korea. So okay, that's the end of this video. If you like this video, don't forget to click on the like and subscribe button. Don't forget to click on the notification bell. And if you have a comment, leave it down below. I'm John Lee, and I'll see you all next time. Bye.